If you are interested in philosophy and religion, you have probably wondered and pondered about God, although I personally think that the term absolute fits better to describe such a concept, and will use it further throughout the video. There are many different conceptions of the absolute, such as a personalized creator, a cosmic order or principle, the source, etc. I want to make a series of videos covering different directions and ways of expressing the absolute. This video is basically a big introduction aimed at providing context for the next ones and creating a foundation by explaining the emergence of religiousness itself, its first forms, its progression, and the question why would humanity need to create the absolute. As you may have noticed, introductions aren't my greatest skill, so let's just get straight to it. The fundamental position of the cognitive science of religion is that religious beliefs are a natural byproduct of the function of the human mind, a set of cognitive tools developed for solving entirely earthly adaptive tasks like finding food or avoiding predators inevitably gives rise to notions of supernatural agents under certain conditions. This approach explains quite well the striking universality and resilience of religious ideas across different cultures and eras. At the core of our inclination towards religious thinking lie two fundamental cognitive mechanisms, the first of which is pattern recognition. The human brain is a machine for finding patterns. For our ancestors in the Pleistocene savanna, the ability to quickly connect disparate data into a coherent picture was a matter of life and death. Tracks on the ground indicated the migration route of a herd, a certain type of cloud foreshadowed rain, and a rustle in the bushes could mean the presence of a predator. This same mechanism, when applied to more large-scale and chaotic phenomena like the movement of stars, the changing of seasons, or the succession of good and bad fortune, becomes the cognitive basis for the search for a higher cosmic order. The second mechanism is intuitive causality. Parallel to the search for patterns, the brain has an innate drive to link events according to the cause and effect principle. We intuitively understand that any event has a cause. This mechanism allows us to build mental models of the world and predict the consequences of actions. However, when this tool is applied to phenomena whose true causes are hidden or too complex to understand, like illness, drought, or a lightning strike, the brain fills the gap with the most accessible and intuitively understandable type of cause, the volitional act of some agent. This brings us to one of the key concepts in the cognitive science of religion. The hyperactive agent detection device is a cognitive mechanism that describes our innate tendency to, by default, attribute events, especially ambiguous ones, to someone's intention. As with pattern recognition, HADD is a product of the evolutionary logic of risk minimization. For our ancestors, it was far safer to mistakenly assume that the snap of a twig was caused by a lurking enemy than to assume it was accidental and fall victim to a real attack. As a result, we have inherited a brain that is tuned to detect agents, even in their absence. It was HADD that filled the cognitive and existential vacuum that surrounded early humans. Incomprehensible and frightening phenomena like the death of a tribesman, a sudden illness, a forest fire from a lightning strike, an earthquake, etc., received their first most intuitive explanation, that behind them stood an invisible agent with specific intentions. A lightning strike was explained as the angry act of a sky spirit, and an illness as the evil will of a spirit that has entered the body. Another crucial cognitive mechanism that contributed to emergence of religiousness was the theory of mind. Tom is our basic ability to understand that other beings have their own inner world, beliefs, desires, intentions, and emotions that may differ from our own. This mechanism is actually critically important for successful social interaction. We constantly read the minds of others to predict their behavior and communicate. The emergence of ideas about the supernatural occurs at the moment when Tom is extrapolated onto the invisible agents detected by HADD. I would call this process the extended theory of mind. If HADD tells us that someone caused the drought, Tom allows us to take the next step and ask the question, why did they do it? The answers to these questions are inevitably anthropomorphic. The river spirit got angry because people broke a taboo, or the fertility goddess desires to receive offerings in exchange for a good harvest. Thus, the synergy of HADD and Tom creates the first prototypes of gods, with consciousness, goals, desires, and emotions very similar to human ones. On this cognitive basis, the first culturally formed religious systems grew. One of the earliest religious systems lives is often considered to be animism, the belief in the universal animation of nature, that every tree, river, mountain, or animal possesses its own spirit or soul, whereas totemism structured this animistic world by establishing a special mystical connection between a specific social group and a particular species of animal or plant, which is considered an ancestor and protector. And shamanism became the first social specialization in the religious sphere. A shaman was a person who was believed to be able to enter a state of trance and communicate directly with the spirit world, acting as an intermediary between it and the human community. These beliefs quickly acquired a crucial social functions that contributed to their consolidation and cultural transmission. A shared belief in the same spirits and ancestors, as well as participation in rituals, created a powerful sense of collective solidarity. They bound together small groups of hunters and gatherers, increasing their chances of survival. Secondly, this belief significantly reduced existential anxiety. By providing explanations for frightening and incomprehensible phenomena, they made the world more predictable and meaningful. And thirdly, through rituals, early beliefs created the illusion of control over uncontrollable forces of nature. Although a ritual could not actually cause rain, it gave people the feeling that they had done everything possible to influence the situation, which reduced stress and promoted social stability. So, we have figured out which cognitive mechanisms were behind the emergence of the first forms of religiousness. Now let's move further along the chronology and consider them in the context of the Neolithic revolution. The transition from the appropriating economy of hunters and gatherers to a producing economy based on agriculture and animal husbandry fundamentally changed the way of life, social structure, the scale of human communities, and consequently the nature of their gods. The life of a hunter-gatherer was full of dangers. They were local and immediate. The life of a farmer became dependent on a large-scale, long-term, and often unpredictable cycles. The change of seasons, river floods, droughts, plant diseases, the spirit of a specific stream, or the patron of a herd of wild animals with whom one could negotiate through a shaman was no longer sufficient to solve problems of such a scale. There arose a need for more powerful deities whose sphere of responsibility would cover the fundamental forces on which the harvest depended. Thus, local spirits were replaced by specialized gods and goddesses of fertility, of weather, the sun, or water. Religion became inextricably linked with the agrarian calendar and economy. Furthermore, the Neolithic revolution led to a demographic explosion. Small nomadic groups were replaced by large sedentary settlements, which eventually grew into city-states. This growth in scale had direct consequences for social and religious organization. Anthropological studies, particularly the work of Robin Dunbar, show that the human brain is capable of effectively maintaining stable social relationship with approximately 150 individuals. When a community exceeds this threshold, formal hierarchical structures like chiefs, elders, and laws are required to maintain order and coordinate actions. As social hierarchies on Earth emerged and became more complex, the heavens began to reflect this new reality. Pantheon of gods, which had previously been more of a disordered assembly of spirits, began to be organized into a complex hierarchical structures, resembling a royal court. A supreme god king appeared, his family a council of higher gods responsible for key spheres of existence, and a host of minor deities, spirits, and heroes occupying lower rungs. This celestial hierarchy had a crucial ideological function. It presented earthly social stratification as a reflection of a divine cosmic order. If there is a king in the heavens, then monarchy on earth is the natural and only correct form of government. The complication of pantheons and the critical importance of their appeasement for an agrarian society led to the professionalization of religious activity and the transformation of ritual itself. Firstly, the priesthood emerged. The knowledge of how, when, and to which god one should pray, what sacrifices to offer, and how to correctly interpret omens became too complex and important to be the property of the whole society. This led to the emergence of a special social class of professional priests. Unlike the shaman, whose authority was often based on a personal charisma and ecstatic abilities, the priest's authority was institutional. He was the keeper of sacred texts, an expert in complex ritual procedures and astronomical calendars necessary for agriculture. The priests had a dual function. On the one hand, they were religious specialists who, through rituals, ensured the connection between the world of humans and the world of gods, guaranteeing cosmic stability and fertility. On the other hand, they were political ideologists who legitimized the power of the ruling elite. They conducted coronation rituals, deified the ruler, declared his will to be the will of the gods, and managed state cults that strengthened the unity and loyalty of the subjects. As a result of this evolution, the function of ritual changed dramatically. In hunter-gatherer societies, ritual was primarily a means of explaining the world and relieving psychological tension. In complex agrarian states, it turned into a powerful technology of social control and governance. Large-scale temple rituals and public festivals organized collective life, synchronized agricultural work, demonstrated the power and wealth of the state, reinforced the social hierarchy, and endowed political authority with an indisputable sacred foundation. Religion became a crucial state institution. As the civilizations of the ancient world developed, accumulating astronomical, mathematical, and administrative knowledge, one of the most significant shifts in the history of human thought occurred. It was a transition from explaining the world through the will of multiple separate personified agents to an attempt to comprehend it as a single order system subject to universal principles. This process marked a movement from mythology to metaphysics. It created the intellectual foundation upon which the concept of the absolute would later be built. In the early stages, every event was the result of a volitional act by a specific supernatural actor. However, with the development of sedentary civilizations that conducted systematic observations of nature, for example to create calendars, it became evident that the world possesses a striking regularity and cyclicality. The sun always rises in the east, the stars move along predictable trajectories, and the floods of the Nile occur at a specific time of the year. The focus shifted from seeking the culprit for an individual event to searching for the fundamental law underlying the entire system. Gods, from being capricious and willful actors, increasingly began to transform into executors or guardians of this higher superdivine law. Let's consider three ancient religious traditions that portray this shift. We will move from the most agentic to the least one. So let's start with the Mesopotamian myths of creation of order from chaos. In the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, the world arises as a result of a titanic battle. The young hero god Marduk defeats Tiamat, the monstrous embodiment of primeval saltwater chaos. From her divided body, he creates the heavens and the earth, orders the movement of the stars, establishes the calendar, and defines the functions of the gods. The world and its structure are the result of a divine act of creation and violence. It is fragile and requires constant support from both the gods and from humans, whose main task is to serve the gods and, through rituals, to maintain the world order they established. So it is still an agentic intentional conception of the absolute, but this order is what defines people's life the most, and living accordingly to it is the most important goal for people in life. So it's already a slightly different view of the supernatural and how to interact with it. Ancient Egypt gives a more hybrid picture. There, the central idea is Ma'at, a multi-layered concept meaning truth, balance, justice, and cosmic harmony. Mythologically, Ma'at is linked with the Creator. The Creator brings order out of the primeval waters, and that established order is called Ma'at. Ma'at becomes a standing norm that structures the cosmos, society, and individual conduct. The pharaoh's main job is to establish Ma'at, to maintain ritual order, social justice, and the Nile cycle. Crucially, Egyptian texts sometimes present the gods themselves as living by Ma'at. When the creator sets the pattern and that pattern endures as a rule to which gods and humans relate, it sounds a bit paradoxical, because if gods need to follow this order as well, does the creator Adam count, or he just created the perfect universal order and left and just exists in the background? I tried to find anything regarding this but couldn't. But it's pretty normal for ancient traditions to not have exhaustive answers for every single paradox, and there are many. Oftentimes, particularly in this historical period, the endless chain of cause and effect needed to end somewhere, and there had to be the one ultimate cause for everything that itself didn't need a cause. And in the two cases explained earlier, it was still an intentional agentic god that created everything. But one of the earliest religious traditions that describes absolute as the primeval impersonal order itself is Vedic Rita. Around 1500 to 1000 BC, a collection of hymns known as the Rig Veda took shape in northern India. Key to these hymns is the concept of Rita. Rita represents the idea of a universal cosmic order to which all things are subordinated. It is the underlying regularity and truth that makes the world run, the law of the heavens and earth, the pattern of seasons, the correctness of ritual speech, and the moral standard for human action. However, even in these traditions, there are gods, for example Varuna and Mitra. It's unknown how they appeared, because again, many ancient traditions don't have exhaustive answers for everything, and a lot of the texts were simply lost or damaged, or just contradict each other, so we don't know for sure how Varuna and Mitra appeared. But they definitely did, and they weren't the creators of Rita, they just guarded and projected it. The most important thing here is that Rita is presented as prior or independent in status, an ordering principle that the divine beings themselves uphold. Over time, Rita's practical and ritual meanings feed into the richer ethical and philosophical category dharma, and later into metaphysical discussions that point toward Brahman or ultimate reality. Maurice Bloomfield, a Sanskrit scholar, said that from the point of view of the history of religious ideas, we may, in fact we must, begin the history of Hindu religion at least with the history of conception of Rita. As I said in the beginning, this video is sort of an introduction and context for a series of videos called To Express the Absolute. I want to explore what were different expressions of the absolute throughout the history of humanity, but most importantly, why are the most common ones referring to a one single source of everything. Whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Hegel's philosophy, and even science, since the theory of everything is aimed to unite all four fundamental interactions, thus aiming to create a final theoretical framework of physics containing all physical principles. And although it's being criticized and marked as unreachable, it's still an attempt to express the absolute, just in the form of a scientific formula. So in conclusion, let's consider why the evolution of ideas about the supreme found its most widespread expression in monotheism and philosophical monism. The formation of the idea of a single origin was conditioned by the convergence of several key driving forces. First is the epistemic economy. This principle, best known in the form of Occam's razor, reflects a fundamental property of human cognition, the striving for the simplest yet most comprehensive explanation. From a cognitive point of view, a complex pantheon with intricate relationships between gods, their contradictory wills, and overlapping spheres of influence is a cumbersome and inefficient explanatory model. The idea of a single omnipotent god or a single first principle from which all the diversity of the world stems is incomparably more economical and elegant. Moral universalization. The expansion of empires, Persian, Hellenistic, monarchies, Roman Empire, and the intensification of international trade led to the mixing of the people with their local cults and ethical systems. Under these conditions, an acute need arose for universal moral and legal norms that could regulate relations between representatives of different cultures and were not tied to a tribal god or a local sanctuary. If there is only one god, then his moral law, for example the Ten Commandments, is absolute and binding for all people, regardless of their origin. Political centralization. A single god in heaven served as the ideal sacred justification for a single ruler on earth. A centralized state cult directed at the worship of one god helped to overcome separatism based on local polytheistic beliefs and to rally the diverse people of the empire into a single whole. It undermined the power of the priests of local cults, who were often centers of opposition, and shifted the focus of religious loyalty to the central authority. Historical examples such as the religious reform of Pharaoh Akhenaten with his cult of the single god Atran, or the subsequent adoption of Christianity by the Roman Empire to strengthen its unity, vividly illustrate this political function of monotheism. And finally, ontological completeness. A purely philosophical search for the first cause of being led to the idea of the absolute. This search was clearly expressed in Greek philosophy, particularly in Aristotle, was motivated by the desire to find a final answer to the endless chain of why questions. If every event has a cause, then what is the cause of that cause itself? This infinite regress was intellectually unsatisfactory. Philosophical thought demanded finding a point of support, a first cause that itself has no cause and does not need an external basis for its existence. Aristotle called this the prime mover, the unmoved source of all motion in the universe. This absolute is the self-sufficient foundation of reality, the point that ends the regress of explanations and gives being its final meaning. All these factors created a powerful synergistic effect. The political need for centralization found its ideological expression in monotheism, which in turn offered a basis for universal morality. This integral system was intellectually attractive to philosophers seeking ontological completeness, and cognitively convenient for the general population as it was easy to explain.